qualifications that that make me qualified to do this work. Also within the Correllian tradition, I do study and function in the Order of World Walkers, which has become a lot more relevant to my work. So there's that. I do prefer the use of he, him pronouns, and you all do not have to disclose your pronouns if you don't want to, but that is my way of making the space safer for people who identify as trans. For this workshop, I do want to hear from you all as frequently as you can. So I want there to be some conversation. I want there to be some dialogue. So if you do want to participate, if you have something that you want to say, use the raise your hand function, and Reverend Lori will unmute your microphone and you will have an opportunity to speak and share. And I really, really do encourage this. Also, I will be asking questions that I would really like y'all to consider and share with the entire group, making this as didactic as possible. So take your time, think about the stuff that I'm asking you, think about the stuff that is being brought up, and then go ahead and share. Your responses are important, and the more you participate, the more you'll be able to take away back to your own groups and to the people that you care for. Sound good? Awesome. So the other thing that I'll be doing is I will be switching back and forth between cameras. So like right here, you see me, I'm sitting down, I'm talking, I'm at my platform with my notes and stuff. But at some point I will switch the camera and you'll see the board. And I will go up there and stand up there and do some talking and teaching from up there. So that'll be a thing that happens. And so with that, the first question that I will ask all of you to think about is, what comes to mind immediately for you when you hear the word thanatology? Contemplate that for a second. And then if you feel you are ready to answer, go ahead and raise your hand. Thanatology. DJ said the Avengers. Word, his name was Thanos. Cool, what else? Who raised their hand so far? I saw 2. 3 participants raised their hand. Okay, let's see.
Okay, guys, I don't know if you realize, but there is a little reaction emoji con here. It's actually a hand raise. I will show you.
Heyo.
All right, Antimony. What comes to mind immediately when you hear the word thanatology?
Well, Thanos being the god of death in Greek mythology, so death and everything that has to do with it, and the ology part is the study of and maybe the practice of working with people through death.
Word, nailed it. So for clarification, Thanatos is the god, not Thanos.
That's right, never mind, sorry. I like the Avengers too much.
And then also, who else had their hand raised? I know Robel has his hand raised, and I know Phoenix Normal had their hand raised as well. So, Robel?
Hi, Thanatology for me means Thanos is the Greek god of death. And all the words ends in ology, it's a science that study that the first part of the word. That thanatology for me means all the science, all the arts that study all about involve the death, griefs, and all the words about death that I don't know in English right now.
Awesome, thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. So specifically, Antimony and Robel, you are both very correct. Thanatology is absolutely the scientific study of death and death practices. So this includes funerary rites and the memorial things that we do to honor our beloved departed. This also covers certain aspects of epidemiology and the way that disease wipes out populations. It's also the study of the needs of the terminally ill as well as their family. This can also include the study of death as a result of various forms of crisis, like war and famine and other forms of natural disaster. For the purpose of this work, I will define the Freudian term thanatos, its opposite eros, and the function that motivates behavior, which is known as libido, which has got a reputation for being exclusive to sex, but that's not really the case. Freud was, or appeared to be, a bit of a hornball in a lot of his writings, but really it was meant to be generalized to behavior and motivation when we speak about libido. So that's what we will be doing. But before we move into that, I would like for some of y'all to volunteer to talk to me about what your personal definition of death is. So what does death mean? How do you define death? What does it mean to die? Anyone?
Hey.
Hey, hi, yeah.
So I had a couple things to say. One thing, question first off, is thinking about thanatology and death. Would you also include working with the ancestors or something along those lines with the thanatology?
So that's a great question. If you want to talk about working with the ancestors as a scientific practice, then I would. If you want to talk about ancestors and working with them as a spiritual practice or a psycho-spiritual practice, then I would not.
Okay.
Reason being, theology implies an empirical aspect, meaning we want to see something repeat in the numbers. So this aspect of empiricism, a lot of times might not mix with some of the things that we do spiritually.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Good question. Kai, you had your hand raised?
I did. I was thinking, for me, death would be a leaving of this physical plane for you, a loved one, or those who you encounter that are leaving the plane.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes. One
And
more.
that's
Luna?
Oh, good, I'm not muted. In my opinion, death is not just something that is physical. I believe death is something that is the irrevocable ending of something that ends and you cannot go back to anything previously. In my mind, that's a death because you can have more than just a physical death.
Ashe, and I'm so happy that you said that. So one of the source materials that I use for writing this course is a textbook that I'm using for grad school right now. It's called Dying, Death, and Bereavement. And I'll show you. And I will have a bibliography for y'all, of course. But it's by Louis Aiken. And so according to the Random House Dictionary of the English Language, death is the act of dying. Kudos for not putting the word in the definition, but whatever. The end of life, the total and permanent cessation of all the vital functions of an organism. This definition is closest in meaning to biological death, however. And we actually acknowledge a lot of other different forms of death aside from the biological. So we have the psychological death, we've got legal death, we got social death, like in the form of ostracism. And we also have civil death, when all your civil rights are removed from you and you are considered civilly dead. So like consider being banished from the kingdom. All right, we do acknowledge more than one different type of death. And with more than one type of definition for death, it means that we can be dead in some ways and not in others, functionally, right? Does that make sense? Right, so think about having a psychological death, but not being physically dead. Can anyone think of an example of a psychological death that does not include physical death?
Reverend Robles still has a question for you.
Okay.
It's not a question, but I answered that question that you. I think the most one moment. I don't know how to say this in English right now. But a psychological death for the trans people, when they accept they are a trans person and they accept they are not being the sex they are assigned to birth.
Yes, right. So in the process of accepting your trans identity and who you are, there's a process sometimes that there's a new name chosen and it corresponds to a new identity. And that old name, that old life is called the dead name, right? And we don't use it anymore. Cats, over, right? Absolutely. Thank you very much. Where did I leave off? Oh yeah, different, like functionally being dead in different ways. So did I already ask for personal definition of death? Yeah, I think I did.
Phoenix,
So,
can I add more?
huh?
Can I add one more?
Sure.
The multiple deaths that a person can go through throughout their life as they grow and transition from one part of their life to another. An example could be if someone gets out of a traumatic or an abusive relationship and they grow past that, they can let that old part of themselves die with the relationship that they left because they saw that that was harmful. So they moved forward and they grew into someone new, leaving behind what no longer helped.
Yes, ma'am. And so what this opens up for us as magical and spiritual people is the utilization of the concept of death as a tool to help us transform and continue growing. Amen. Amen. Oh, I remember where I left off. So an example of a psychological death that doesn't include biological death actually falls within the realm of the psychological disorder schizophrenia. There's a condition known as catatonia in which you psychologically don't respond to any stimuli. Psychologically dead, biologically still functional. And so I wanted to bring that up just so that you have a working understanding of how nuanced this could actually be. The entire title for this workshop at one point was Thanatology, utilizing the attitudes towards death continuum to encourage healthy coping during bereavement. And so this will be the working title when I do present it to other mental health social worker providers who want some continuing education credits. But for this case, I shortened it a little bit. But what I'm about to talk to you about right now is the continuum attitude towards death and how we can utilize that system or that concept to help design coping skills for people who are suffering. Moving forward, after that, we will talk about some of the things that contribute towards developing attitudes towards death. So interestingly enough, there are a lot of dynamics that impact how we think about death from one moment to the next, from one part of our life to the next. So first off, thanatos, right? That is the Freudian term that defines the death instinct. This is the force that is hypothesized to be responsible for self-destructive behaviors that can result in death, as well as the urge to solve the mystery of death. So these behaviors can include violence, aggression, suicide, addiction, unprotected and risky sex, not taking your medications if you've got conditions that are lethal or terminal and require medical treatment, as well as the desire to provoke powerful beasts. So if anyone has been watching that atrocity, The Tiger King, you know, the desire to traffic with beasts like that can be represented by a desire to solve the mystery of death, and that represents a death urge. Skydiving, bungee jumping, thrill-seeking behavior that can result in death all fall under the urge that is present with Thanatos. The exact opposite is Eros. And this is the life instinct, not just love, right? But the life instinct in general. And it's hypothesized to be responsible for the affirming behavior that can result in experiencing the mystery of life. So this could be planting seeds in growing gardens. This could be having sex that leads to more life-affirming behaviors, building connections with other people. This includes nurturing children. And as a nod to the matron goddess that Lady Steph revealed to us at the Connecticut Lustration, this could also mean caring for communities and organizations that have an impact on communities. And then the motivation to participate in either of those urges is libido. So it's literally psychic energy that results from or motivates movement in service of either Thanatos or Eros. And so at any given time, our libido can mix and gel to have us serve either of those or both of those at the same time. And so can anyone think of a behavior that serves both Thanatos and Eros at the same time? Something that's risky, but also serves life.
I was going to say as a joke, getting married and having children.
Amen, that's funny.
I was going to say childbirth.
Yes, yes, giving birth, absolutely. If you've ever observed a childbirth, neither of the participants appear to be doing all that medically well.
I was
Indeed.
going to say sex, because in French, an orgasm is called le petit mort, which is the little death.
Yup. Any others? Can you think of any behaviors that serve both Thanatos and Eros that are risky, but also result in life?
When you rebelled your emotions to someone, and it's all the candy thing for both.
Yes, yes. Think about someone who would risk their life to save an animal or a child who is in immediate danger, right? Getting somebody out of the way of a moving vehicle serves both.
Ricky?
So it's a lot more common than you think for our energy to be utilized in serving both of those energies.
I was going to say eating.
Say more.
Well, you eat things that are bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Sometimes being an organ donor can be risky, but it'll save a life.
Being an organ donor, like a living organ donor?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Because sometimes they'll do the transplant and the person who gave ends up dying sometimes.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. All right, so now I want to introduce you to this attitude towards death continuum. So here we have the continuum, right? Like this represents that the perspectives that we are discussing here can go in either direction. And really, it's meant to illustrate that attitude towards death are not binary kind of things. Like you either embrace it or you reject it. There are many things, there are many places that you can fall on the continuum that represents an attitude towards death. But for ease of understanding, we're going to talk about 3 different parts on the continuum. So over here on this side, This is the attitude that death is an ever victorious mortal enemy to all things living. And on this side, there is an acceptance of death as a welcomed passage to more blissful state of being. And then right here, somewhere in the middle, we consider death the great mystery that everyone will solve, but none can give actual hints to what the mystery actually is once it's revealed. And so with those three concepts in mind, is anyone willing to talk about for a second their own attitude towards death?
Denial.
Say more.
When you love someone you love, the first thing I feel is no, this is not possible.
All right, thank you. And so denial will come up a little bit later when we talk about the process of dying and the stages of grief. Good job, thank you. Anyone else? Does anyone view death as the ever victorious mortal enemy of all living things? Does anyone accept death as a passage or a transition to a better state of being? Anyone think of it as the great mystery that we all have to solve? If not any of those three, then which?
I just see it as a change. Just like everything is always evolving and changing, it's just a change, sometimes from one plane to another, from one situation to another, from one state of feeling to another. It's just, I mean, death is just rebirth.
So a passage to another state of being, maybe not more blissful, maybe not less blissful, but just a passage to another state of being altogether.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different beings. We have, I mean, we know there's lots of planes of existence. So it could just be passing from one plane to another, or just one thought to another.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I said, it's just change,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't necessarily bad.
Say that again?
It's change isn't necessarily bad or good. It's just different.
Oh.
Different perspective.
So what you just expressed is a concept that I call acceptance, right? It's neither good nor bad, it just is what it is.
Yes.
And that right there, the concept of acceptance will be super important when it comes time to develop coping skills for folks who might be stressing over this. Where would you put your perspective, DJ, on that spectrum?
Probably right in the middle.
So right here?
Yeah.
So that's the great mystery spot. This is the passage spot.
Okay.
This is the enemy spot.
Okay. Maybe in between the mystery spot and the one on the far right.
Right here?
Yes. Maybe like right in between them. Yes.
All right, anybody else?
I see death as a friend. I see death as something that the only thing in life that you truly have is death. That's the only thing that's a surety. So for me, it's that presence that's always walking beside you, and it never leaves your side. So for me, death is a friend. Death is someone who walks through life with me. And so I kind of see it's not something. It's not like I don't fear death. I don't really want to die either, but like it'll happen.
Ooh,
Okay with that.
I don't fear death, but I don't also want to die.
I mean, it'll happen.
So that's kind of like an ambivalent kind of response, right? Like, I don't fear death, but also
I don't wish it.
if I woke up in my bed for the next couple of years.
Right. It's not like I want, some people wish for death sometimes. I don't really wish for it, but it's not like I'm trying to run away from it either. It's a friend. It'll be there when it's my time. And until then, I'm going to live my life.
And so, Luna, where would you put that response on the continuum?
So remind me, we have one side is the mystery. It's a mystery.
Enemy, mystery, welcomed passage to another state of being.
What's the red one again? I didn't hear you.
Enemy.
Oh, it's not an enemy. I'd say it's both mystery and both a welcome. It's both. It's both of those things at the same time.
So
it is a mystery. There are mysteries of death. We'll never know until we walk that path. But on the other hand,
put it on the continuum.
I guess on the star, it's a friend.
Which one?
The big star. Yeah, that one. I would say. We're friends.
Lord Phoenix, if you're going to go that much higher above the line, adjust your camera slightly up.
Slightly up.
Yes, sir. And Lady Kai is next.
How's that?
Better, thank you.
All right, Kai, go for it.
As a healthcare worker, I've seen death multiple times, especially in like the nursing home setting. A lot of times, the resident sees and accepts death, and it's something they look forward to almost to get rid of the pain, while their family members are seeing death as an enemy, that they're taking away their loved one.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely a present dynamic. So for your perspective of death, where would it go on the continuum?
I'm very accepting of death. I would put it way over to the, it's definitely not an enemy. I've seen too much sickness and pain to think that it was an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
That a lot of the deaths that I've seen, it was a true blessing that they've passed on.
Okay. So here in between DJ and Luna, or somewhere else on this side, where would you go?
I would go more over towards Luna, kind of put me like right with her.
Okay. Thank you. So there are a bunch of factors that influence what determines someone's attitude towards death. All right, so first of all, actually, let's talk about how attitudes of death have changed. Thinking back to the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, death and dying was far more visible for them than it is for us today. It was super likely that folks were seeing public executions. It was super likely that ordinary skirmishes between people would result in a fatality. It was likely that mass epidemics would claim the lives of many, many people. So the Black Plague killed approximately 25% of the population of Europe. So as a result, prior to the 19th century, people who knew they were going to be dying would actually organize bedside rituals in their own homes to celebrate their passing and their life. Deathbed rituals would actually come to be replaced by postmortem rituals by the mid-20th century. These rituals would further minimize, sometimes to single-day affairs, and by this point today in the United States, the hallmark of our funeral services is not the attention that we pay to the dying, not the attention that we pay to the grieving or the bereaved, but for how quick they are, for their, efficiency, for how efficient they are in getting the work done, and getting folks back to, business, back to work, or back to participating in their lives. This can be seen as a result of less personal interactions with death and dying. So our family members, a lot of times, are passing in institutions like hospitals or nursing homes, or facilities. Criminals are dying in prison. And the ill are more likely to die in an institution away from the observation of immediate loved ones, with certain what's the word I'm looking for? Exceptions, with certain exceptions. And so what this has kind of led to is attitudes about death being out of sight, kind of out of mind. We have the luxury or the option of seeing a corpse completely made up, looking nice. The mortician can sew a little smile in, like the nails are done up nice. We can dress our corpses any way we want to, make them look gorgeous. And so it really takes away some of the impact of participating in the death work that our ancestors used to have to do. So prime example, way back when, it was the family's job to dig the grave of the deceased, but now we got mini backhoes that do it for us. And so that's an example of how and why attitudes towards death have changed. Some developmental considerations for thinking about death. So age. Can anyone think back to the first age where they started contemplating death as an integral part of life? When did you first become aware of death as an inevitability? Ricky?
I was about 4, I think. I was about 4, and I came home from church. That was the first time I found out about death.
Word. Who else?
I was 7 years old. I went to my first funeral.
7 years old.
Robles?
I was 12 years old when one of my best friends died in a car crash.
Thank you. So consider, what considerations do we have, or what allowances do we make for someone who has not had the experience of burying a family member or someone that they were close to? For someone who has not had the experience of burying a lifelong friend? How might proximity to death influence our behaviors, the judgments that we place on others when it comes to dealing with this experience? You don't have to answer that just now, but just consider that. What do we expect from other people when it comes to the process of managing feelings and behaviors related to the bereavement process or losing a loved one? Consider how disability might alter someone's perception or the role of a disability, or limits the quality of life on someone's attitude towards death. quality of life as we are experiencing right now is remarkably important to all of us, right? Like I saw a meme earlier that said that they were willing to sell their soul to get Joanne's back. That's a quality of life thing. Right? So when it comes to various forms of ability or disability, I'm sorry, I don't have like a more politically correct word to talk about that, but for folks who are not abled in a way that we expect or that we typically expect, how might that impact what they think or believe about death?
Lady Calypso.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that being of a different culture can have a different attitude towards death? Because in Puerto Rico, they totally have a different attitude about it.
Other considerations, race and ethnicity and culture absolutely impact how people think about and experience death. Your sex, women, females, people that we perceive to be feminine are remarkably vulnerable in a patriarchal society. Right? Danger sometimes can feel like it's lurking around at any corner. Level of education impacts considerations towards death. Occupation, right? What must you think about death and dying in order for you to be a skydiving instructor? That's a job. People do that. People get paid to jump out of planes. And as well as religious beliefs, all considerations. The reason why I bring up these considerations is because when we are working with people who are bereaving, who are grieving, who are in the bereavement process, it's very important to find out where they are on that continuum. It is not our job as a helper, as a pastoral counselor, as members of the high priesthood or clergy to change someone's attitude towards death, but it is our job to embrace where they are and help them design behaviors and activities that help them cope, get from one moment to the next, and also determine what values they want to serve while they continue their own lives. Does that make sense? So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 1969 came up with the stages of dying. This concept would later be translated into the stages of grief. I'm not exactly sure when that change took place, but at some point, folks stopped calling it the stages of dying and started calling it the stages of grief. These stages, it was done with some empiricism. Like, I would not say that this is extremely empirically supported because the number in her experiment or in her qualitative research, the participant pool was about 200 people. And so by our standards in psychological research today, N equals 200 plus is not a relatively decent sample size. However, her work did more to instill a sense of interest in the study of thanatology. So she has really gained some fame for this work. And so one of the things I'm about to share with you right now are the stages of death as outlined by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So, share my screen, that. Boom, can y'all see that?
Yes, sir.
All right, so first stage, denial. I did decide to go with the clinical definitions of these things because I do believe that folks who are going to be working with people in a pastoral care setting should know the clinical language because you never know when you have to talk to a clinical professional, right? So life coaches, counselors, readers who provide services professionally, it's important to have a clinical understanding. It's also important to know when you should make a referral to a more qualified professional. And when you are talking to these qualified professionals, having a common language is super helpful. So denial, first stage, says that it can be conscious or unconscious decision to refuse to admit to something that's happening. That's legit true. This can manifest in the form of denying specific information. This can manifest in the form of selective attention. This can manifest in the form of selective perception and selective memory, right? So knowing that someone has gotten the information about their tragedy, but for whatever reason they don't remember, they can't articulate when or where they got the information or who delivered it. It seems strange, but the brain and the mind and what the brain does to protect us is super mysterious. And just dropping a whole bunch of information or a whole day to stop you from being overwhelmed with feelings of defeat or sadness or helplessness, the brain does that. There are things called dissociative episodes, which is another example of your brain pulling you out of a situation to keep you mentally safe. Anger. So an emotional or physical act in which the patient attempts to place blame. There can be reports of lack of trust. The anger is usually generalized. And the anger arises from a place of recognizing or acknowledging a sense of unfairness about the situation. So in order to arrive at a place of anger, denial has to be wiped away. So once there can be no more denial, anger is, it proceeds. So feelings of unfairness, it's definitely non-discriminating. So it can be directed at the self. I should have used my life better. I should have quit smoking. I should have taken that medical advice sooner. So also directed at family. These are my bad genes. So-and-so did this to me when I was younger. It can be directed at God, and it can be directed at medical and support staff, right? So doctors aren't doing everything that they can do. The nurses are evil. The interns were careless, all of these things. And this can manifest in shouting, screaming, name calling, just overall derisive behavior. Next is bargaining. It's a negotiative process. I love the bargaining stage as a magical practitioner. And I actually do a lot around developing coping skills or activities around bargaining. So as magical people, what exactly can we help folks do in the bargaining stage? We'll come back to it. But the bargaining stage, usually there's some prayer that can happen, right? Like bargain with God or the fates. Bargaining with physicians, bargaining with people who have more money to help pay for operations or treatment, all occur in the bargaining stage. Bargaining is viewed as a healthier way of dealing with the situation, more healthy than denial, more healthy than anger, even if it is potentially futile. Depression happens after denial and anger and bargaining have appeared to all failed. It represents a fuller acceptance of the impending death. It is a feeling of loss of control, definitely hopelessness. This particular chart references diabetic patients. And it's interesting because folks who have diabetes, when their condition is not managed, depression is absolutely one of the experiences that folks can have. But then also, like, have you seen diabetes rage? It's nutty. And then following depression is the acceptance. It's the final stage of the process. It's characterized by a quiet expectation of whatever it was that was being denied in the first place, or whatever the condition is. It's considered the healthiest way of facing death. Now, I find that very interesting. If you're facing death, why does the way that you face it have to be healthy? Well, the answer is, if you're not facing death in a healthy manner, there's an increase in suffering, right? If you're going to die, do you want to be suffering psychologically on your slow walk or your quick walk?
We have a question from Robles.
Go for
it. Bargain means that the person is willing to accept, even if only a little bit, a possibility that they do not want.
Say that again, please.
That bargain means that the person is willing to accept, even if only a little bit, a possibility that they do not want. This means that's the death itself.
Yep. So they'll try to trade, offer things to kind of get more time, even if it's a little bit more time, bargaining, trying to make deals, that kind of thing. Give me just 10 more days, Doc. Is there anything you can do to give me 10 days? God, seriously, there are like 900,000 people who are way more suitable for dying right now than me. Can you take 10 of them so I can get 10 more years? The problem with the way that this is presented is that it makes it seem like these are stages or steps that you go through. There is a more appropriate way to think about the stages of dying and the stages of grief and bereavement. Now, when I saw this, I was tickled silly, and I cannot wait to show it to you. But for the purposes of working with folks who are grieving or in the process of, going through this, I want you to think of it like this. Y'all see that? Do y'all see why when I saw that, I was tickled silly?
Mm-hmm.
So what this shows is that the stages of grief or dying are multi-directional, right? So you can go from denial and isolation to anger, or you can go to acceptance. You can travel across acceptance over to depression, back up to denial, back down to bargaining. You can go around in a circle. You can go in many directions. This is way more fluid than just taking a steps approach. Step one, denial. Take a step down closer to death, now you're angry. Take a step down closer to death, now you're depressed. Take a step down, now you're bargaining. Take a step down, now you're accepting. Take a step down, now you're dead. It's not the case. It really is a matter of cycling through these experiences until you arrive at a place of sustained acceptance. And when I say sustained acceptance, I mean you are there, you're at acceptance, and no matter what you learn, no matter what you try, no matter what you believe, you recognize this is the thing that's going to happen. For folks who are in the bereavement process and they are not actually going to die, right? Like they are witnessing a loved one who is in the process of passing away. The acceptance is coming to terms with the fact that yes, their loved one is going to pass away. Yes, it is going to be hard. It's going to be treacherous. Yes, things are going to be different. Yes, I am also coming to terms with my own mortality. So learning that someone that we care about is going to die, is passing away, automatically brings us in tune with our own mortality. The fact that we are also going to pass away. And that triggers a psychological crisis in and of itself. Any questions so far?
What if you don't have all 5 stages?
What do you mean?
So what if you're not in denial? You're pissed off because it's happening. It doesn't depress you. You're not bargaining, but you're accepting it.
Mhm. So the research says that denial, no matter how brief, always occurs. Right? And so denial could be very much as getting the news from your doctor and being like, get out of town, you gotta be kidding me.
Or oh crap. Really? Okay.
Yep. And so sometimes I think that in the psychological field, there's things are left intentionally vague for the sake of our theories, right? Like it's called confirmation bias, where we want the thing that we're working on to work so well that we stretch it in many different ways to make it apply. We're supposed to watch out for that when we do our research. Some folks are better at it than others. But someone might like really just be like, oh, you're gonna die? Right? And there's the anger, like right there.
Yep.
And was in denial. And so what Kubler-Ross would say, or what some other folks who really subscribe to this says that, okay, fine, then you started at anger, denial will come at a different time, right? So like maybe you start off angry and then you hit your buddies up and you're like, tell the news. And so you and your friends get together, you share the news, and at some point during the interaction, you're like, nah, I can't believe this isn't happening. So another example of how denial can come up. Any other questions?
Yes, Phoenix question.
Go
You
for
talked about, in this particular illustration, it's almost like someone's been given a diagnosis, a stage 4 cancer or something like that. So
Mhm.
you're working through it. Now, the last chart you put up was about grief, meaning those that are left behind. In a
Mhm.
sense, they go through those stages, and maybe they go through those stages because of someone who had a sudden death. Does the loved ones or the family and friends, as the person who is dying or has been diagnosed as dying is going through stages, their family as well, or are they going through the bargaining process? Are they going through the okay?
Yep.
So given our situation here around the world, where thousands of people are dying every day, and they go into the hospital knowing that they're ill, and their families are forbidden from being with them, so they're faced with dying alone, and their loved ones are faced with not being able to say goodbye. So how does that affect stages of grief? Damning the virus, like what would they go through? Well, what are they going through by the thousands or the millions right now?
Yeah, so the only thing I can say as to what are they going through is we would have to ask them individually. However, we can apply the stages to what is happening. And so like, yeah, they might be damning the virus. They might be bargaining with any of their spiritual allies for more time, or for access to their loved ones. They might be bargaining with like their own family fortune, like, hey, can we pay our way into the hospital room to be with our family? They might be cursing other aspects of society. Interestingly, we do see a lot of judgments on people who are not following the mandates, right? Like we are seeing folks on social media really kind of calling folks names, really trying to make efforts to control other people's behavior, right? Like, oh, if you go outside, you're stupid. Oh my goodness, how ignorant could you be for wanting to do this? Meanwhile, that is an example of that anger that's coming because of like this unfairness and this powerlessness. Thank you.
Expressing it in defiance, or, well, some people are expressing it in defiance.
Could be. For some folks, it's safer outside than it is inside. Right? Like someone might want coronavirus instead of living with Ike Turner. So when it comes to coping, I have an extreme bias against anything that promotes avoidance of the present moment experience. So what that means is the coping skills that take you away from what you're experiencing emotionally. So I do not discuss the use of alcohol as a coping skill. I do not discuss, well, actually any substances really. So that includes like food, right? I do not discuss the use of exercise as a coping skill. I do not discuss the use of cleaning your house as a coping skill, because all of those things promote avoidance, specifically experiential avoidance. And what happens when you avoid an experience in the present moment, if it's painful, it leads to prolonged suffering. So if you consider anything that has been emotionally scary for you that you have chosen not to deal with, all you've done was put it at the bottom of the emotional to-do list. And as you tick off the things that you're more comfortable doing, that uncomfortable thing is going to come back to the top of the list. And every time it returns to the top of the list, it becomes more scary. And what we end up doing is engaging in ongoing patterns of behaviors that, one, suppress or diminish our attention to that hurtful thing. And it has us chasing this illusory bliss, right? So coping skills that we design for people who are in pain, from my perspective, in order for them to be the most beneficial for growth, has to come with a level of acceptance of the highs and lows that naturally occur in the experience of having a full, healthy, and meaningful life. Does that make sense? When it comes to the various attitudes towards death, can anyone think of a coping skill that lets someone accept death as an enemy to mortals, but also encourages them to explore what's happening in the present moment and behave affirmingly?
Can you clarify that? Because I see a lot of
Absolutely.
head tilting,
So
mine included.
So when it comes to viewing death as an enemy towards mortals, right? If it's something that's always going to come, it's always going to be victorious over us. If that's what we believe about death, what can we do? What can we encourage someone to practice or participate in to help them experience their grief, their pain, their anger, their depression, without trying to make them see death differently?
Lady Kai?
If you see death as it's gonna happen and you don't want to see them differently, and someone's always thinking it's just gonna happen, that they could possibly get hit by a bus. I don't know. One of the things where when Maggie was born, my first child, I was like, oh, so I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. The first thing I did was make a will out. So getting your affairs in order, just generally just going and living like you're going to live, but it could happen at any moment.
Yes, ma'am. That is an exact example. Death is coming, ain't nothing you can do. It's gonna get you. Make sure you have these particular affairs in order. Yes, that is an example. Who's got another one?
I tell people to fully live. Like, death is coming. You only have now. So live now. This is all you get. Go for it. What is it that you've been wanting to do? Do it.
Enjoy this day today and tomorrow. Absolutely. And so live life in the present is actually a mindfulness activity. So mindfulness is a buzzword in mental health counseling and therapy right now, and it means paying attention to the present moment on purpose without judgment. And so live fully might mean go out to that party even though you feel angry right now. What else? Good job. What else?
Go skydiving.
Skydive.
Phoenix,
The
normal.
bucket list. The bucket list.
Bucket list.
Okay, okay, so my thing to say was, if they're afraid they're gonna die, I think it's a good coping mechanism to think about like their loved ones' lives, like someone that they care about. What did they do in their lives? What did you like? And that what good memories do you have with that person? Initially, when you said the question, I was thinking like coping from someone else's death, like someone they loved died, and they're like, how do I cope with that? And I think a good technique could be like, well, think about some good memories with that person, or think about like some exciting positive thing that happened, and then you can kind of, because that puts it less of like this, oh my gosh, they're gone, and more of this, oh yeah, I really cared about that person. Then they can kind of grieve in their own way. I think it also reflects onto like what matters to them in their life. What do they want to leave behind
Yes.
when they go? And I
Yes.
think that can kind of comfort.
Absolutely. And part of the thing that you discussed here is a concept called reframing. And so reframing is when you put a different spin or a different type of energy on a current situation, right? So someone is dying, but look at that legacy though. The other thing is that when we view something as an enemy, we have a natural impulse to fight it. And so if we have a natural impulse to fight it, if our libido is placed on fighting this enemy, even though it's going to be ultimately victorious, some of the things that we might encourage people to do are adopt healthier diets, right? So eating as an emotional control tool leads to a lot more stress, right? Like we can only eat so many slices of pizza and mozzarella sticks before we're starting to have very serious issues of our own. But if we want to fight this enemy, we can adopt healthier lifestyles and behaviors that preserve us for a lot longer.
Reverend Robles.
I think make things that we consider avoiding the death, like go to parties, eat a lot, drinking. Some of kinds, if we do it in a controlled way, that makes the time to feel full power. But when we experiment a loss, we are feeling powerless at all, and make things that avoiding this situation for a little makes me time to heal and feel better to front of this situation and accept this.
Thank you. So the one thing that I do want to warn against is doing things to make you feel better in the short term. So full disclosure, I actually like funerals and the repasts that come after them, because a lot of times, because I live so far away from my family, a funeral is one of the most common ways or the most frequently occurring ways that I get to see a lot of my family.
Sir Allen's next.
Yeah, one of the things, I've got a couple of points here. What you were saying, Lord Phoenix, just a few minutes ago, I had a friend of mine who at the age of 18, he thought of and listed all the things that he wanted to do in life. And he was depressed for about a week or two afterwards because he realized he couldn't live long enough to accomplish all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But he later got very involved in life extension. And he started reading books, reading all the things about supplements. He's constantly sent me stuff. He's survived a couple of near heart attacks. He gives his friends all sorts of health advice. And so help me, this man is in his mid 60s and he has not looked like he has aged since he was about 40.
Fact.
And so, it's kind of like that energy turned around and put into that right direction.
Yes, sir.
The other thing that I put halfway as a joke in the comments was, well, if they're going to see the death as the enemy, turn them into a Klingon. But in a very real sense, some of our depictions in culture talk about attitudes towards death. And, you know, the Klingons are, today's a good day to die, and that kind of thing. That warrior culture, which exists, for instance, in the Japanese samurai and such, those kinds of things can be strengths. In my own culture, I'm a Finlander on both sides. And there's one word that's extremely important in Finnish, sisu. It means guts, determination, stick to it, shovel the 6 inches, even though another 18 is coming. You know, it's the do or die kind of attitude to keep going. And those kinds of cultural ideals and words can be ways to deal with stuff. In Masonry, one of the symbols is a skull, because it reminds you you're going to die someday. Do some things that are worth living for.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Lord DJ?
So I was going to say too, one of the things that you should always strive to do, or someone should strive to do, is just live without regret, so that you die without regret.
Is it possible to do that? How
It's
likely do you think it is?
I
If
mean,
you're living
everything's
fully-
possible. I mean,
Hold up. So if you're living fully, how likely is it that you will rack up no regret?
coulda, woulda, shoulda. You know, just trying to live without regret, or as little regret as possible. Like, oh, well, I should have done that, but I never did. You know, I should have gone back to school, but I never did. You know, stuff like that, you know.
So in pop culture, the idea of living without regret comes with this connotation of risky behavior. And so what I would reframe living without regret to be is living in accordance with your values. And so our values are the compass that guides us. And if we live according to our values, it's less likely that we will have experiences that result in regret due to our own misstep, right? So regrets can come upon us sometimes outside of our control, right? We could be interacting with someone else and they do something that we are kind of involved with accidentally, and like, man, I shouldn't have hung out with you that day. So for example, if you grow up in like an impoverished neighborhood, and like one of your best friends having to steal cars, but you're not a car thief, right? Like hanging out with that person, best friend, steal a car that day, you're with them, damn, I regret this day. So that is why I say move towards your values or live in accordance with your values. Can anyone think of coping skills or activities or behaviors that you would use for someone, or that you would encourage for someone who views death as a mystery to be solved? I'll give you a hint. It involves increasing your proximity to death.
Lord Robles?
A doctor, a philosopher, shows that death like a mystery to be solved.
Say that one more time for me.
A doctor, a physician, and a philosopher too.
So a doctor, physician, healer. Yep.
Philosopher.
Yep, philosopher. So when you talk about philosophy, do you mean like contemplating and making sense, or, you know, coming up with alternate meanings for death?
When I said philosophy, I said philosophy like I studied at a university. But we have an entire material only for metaphysics and all the study of death and the process of rebirth and all that kind of things. And it's a part, and philosophy and death in some kind of great philosophers in history, they make a point in their body of work.
Certainly do. Actually, when you say that, I came across a quote or a poem that was super hilarious to me. I'm gonna try to find it. So this one is from Cicero. No man can be ignorant that he must die, nor be sure that he may not this very day. And so I thought that that was like a super powerful statement. And then also Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. I thought that was hilarious. So yeah, taking a closer look at death, its process. What else?
Lord Phoenix?
Yes, sir.
You just reminded me of something when you were talking about the mystery and everything. I was at a professional workshop and I asked somebody, what do you do? And he said, oh, I teach humor to psychotherapists. And I said to him, well, that'd be good, except, you know, at that time I was working in hospice. And he said, oh, no, I work with dying people all the time. And I said, oh, what do you do? He says, well, I tell dying jokes to dying people. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, my best case was a guy that he knew that he literally had minutes to live. And I came into the room and because I had worked with him before, he started laughing that I was coming in. And I said to him, you know, Jake, in a few minutes, you're going to know things that none of us have experienced or understood at all on earth. You're going to go beyond that veil. You're going to know these things and go into the great mystery. And I just have one thing to ask of you. And he said, yeah, what is it? He says, if there's any way that you could communicate it to me somehow in the next few days, next week, whenever, I'd really appreciate it. He goes, yeah, what is it? He says, you've got to tell me the lotto numbers for this week. And the guy literally died laughing. Perfect. And if you think of what a blessing that is, because when you're laughing, when you're really guffawing, there's no future and no past. There's only the present.
Yes, present moment awareness. And so that was one of the stipulations that I had for talking about these coping skills, that they have to embrace the experience of the present moment. So working with people who are dying is one way to move a little bit closer to that mystery, or at least seeing more of the puzzle pieces. What else? Mystery coping skills. You could learn about the poisons and their antidotes. Any others? You could learn to practice mediumship.
Learning martial arts to a certain extent. The history of great warriors and such, going a little bit back to that Klingon thing, but certainly exists in a lot of different cultures. Talking to people who've been in the military and all those kinds of experiences too.
And Ricky has said meditation.
Yep.
And from Luna, exploring spiritual truths and spiritual mysteries, getting into occult. Oh, it moved. mysticism, and Phoenix Normal, working with the ancestors and honoring them.
Yes, so ancestor work, venerating ancestors, and designing rituals is one of my favorite things to do with people who are grieving. And so in this current moment where we are struggling to be with each other, we are demonstrating right now the possibility of virtual memorial services. Right? Very easy, very possible for someone to host a virtual memorial service, someone to get on the screen and say, hey, I want to talk about my grandma Louise. This is her legacy. Embracing the legacy of those who are deceased is also a great way to think about the mystery of dying, right? Does anyone know about that poem, The Dash? Has anyone ever heard of it? Is someone willing to Google the poem, The Dash? If you're willing to do it, raise your hand. Hey, Luna, thank you. So yeah, research the poem, The Dash. It talks about how you spend your dash, as in the time or the first date on your tombstone and the last date on your tombstone. And then when you are done reading it, come back and give us some feedback on that poem. For folks who view death as a friend or as a welcome transition to another state of being, either blissful or redemptive or what have you, what coping skills could we get them to explore or utilize
And Lady Luna is back.
Okay.
So I actually raised my hand because I'd already read that one before. Basically, the idea is you have a birth date, you have a death date, and then you have a dash in between. But the only thing that matters really is the dash in between and how you live it. And the other reason why I had my hand raised is I was going to say what you were talking about reminds me of when, and I don't remember what it is, but I remember that there was this thing where you would record people, like old people who were getting ready to pass about their lives. And you would like ask, like grandma, for example, you'd ask her questions about like her life so that you can get like her perspective on tape. And I remember like even a while ago, they had like kiosks where you could just go, it doesn't matter how old you were, and record your own experience that you wanted to be like preserved, essentially. I know that they did this in New York City after the Twin Towers fell for a little while. And that, it just reminded me of that. That's another way of coping as well.
Absolutely. Perfect.
My mother is now 96 years old, and I have 2 hours of her on video and 2 hours on audio of her life story.
Yes.
Got a lot of records and a lot of things there, and she was able even to remember some things she had forgotten as a result of that. And that life review for anybody who's up there in years is very healing and very positive for them.
Yeah. Certainly, thank you.
Or if you know a family member that is up there in the years, and say a grandmother, great grandmother, get those recipes now.
Yes.
Because if they didn't write it down, you're never going to remember them. So talk to them, get with them, find their story.
Can you imagine how frustrating life would be if we could never make a dish that was so special to us or share it with our children?
Yes. Because back then they didn't write their recipes down. It was in their head. It was whatever they had in the house. It was a pinch of this, a dash of that. We do that all the time. Well, what did grandma put in this? Whatever she had. But there was still some type of a basics to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? So learning the process by which our family members create the things that are so special to us and participating in that. Absolutely. Any others? Death as a transition or a welcomed friend.
Right. So we just ain't going. So the answer is to say enough, Jack.
Getting into genealogy.
Genealogy, yes.
And from Reverend Phoenix, family photos.
Family photos. Absolutely. So before I get ready to conclude part one, when it comes to working with people who are grieving or who are experiencing loss, we are likely to see a lot of different behaviors. There are only 3 that are considered dangerous or problematic. That is homicidal ideation, suicidal ideation, and psychosis. Those 3 things, right? So within the context of that anger we were talking about earlier, we don't really get concerned at what someone is doing unless they're talking about hurting someone else, hurting themselves, or an unwanted experience with voices or visualizations or feelings that they are not immediately calling for. The reason why I make that distinction is because as people who practice mediumship and who practice spiritual communications, we do sometimes hear the voice, see the thing, feel the thing, right? And so one of the classifications I make clinically is, did you ask for it? If you didn't ask for it, then it might be a source of clinical concern. And so if you are working with someone and they are expressing that they want to hurt someone else, that they want to hurt themselves, or they are having experiences with their senses that they are not asking for, that would absolutely be one of those times where you make a referral to someone who is a professional. I'm not joking on this one because liability is no joke. And if you are not a professional, you also don't have insurance that covers you in this event. So keep that in mind. If you are not fully qualified to be doing therapeutic things, then stay out of the therapy role and stick into the coaching role. And so when it comes to coaching, you start asking questions that will elicit internal responses for like coping skills. So what are you in the mood for right now? Notice in the mood for right now brings us into the present moment. Right now I'm in the mood to eat some pizza and ... right? So pizza is an example of one of those things, like a comfort food. Like other comfort foods are probably also cheesy and filled with carbs. They might also be high in sugars. And the reason why we go to these things is because they also hit us with dopamine in our brain in the same place that like alcohol and sex and cocaine and cannabis, all those things that we know bring enjoyment, food, comfort food, impacts us in the same place. So the place in the brain, draw like this. Right, so inside the brain, we have this place that roughly looks like this. It's called, actually, I'll show it to you. I didn't switch the camera, my bad. Can you see this right here?
Yes, sir.
All right, so there's a spot in our brain right here. It's called the nucleus accumbens or the ventral tegmentum. And this is the site of action for dopamine, right? That is our feel-good neurotransmitter. Comfort food acts on this, sex acts on this, cannabis, alcohol, nicotine, all the feel-good things act on this part in the brain. And so that is why we reach for comfort foods and certain substances when we are feeling down. It's because we know that it can very quickly get us to feeling good. It's only a distraction because at some point, the feelings of badness or sadness are going to come back, and constantly reaching towards those feel goods constantly keeps us at an emotional disadvantage. So when you are working with folks, ask them about things that keep them grounded in the present moment, that keeps them able to articulate, manage, and kind of get through the present moment experience, right? So instead of avoiding, right, just get through it. And so one of the things that I say to a lot of my patients is the only way out is through. I do have something that I want to actually know. Homework, right? So if any of you are coming back to part 2 tomorrow, there is some homework that I want y'all to do before you come back. You got 2 choices. You can either write your own eulogy, write a portion of your will. So maybe who do you want your magical tools to go to? Who do you want to be responsible for cleaning out your temple? Who is going to be the next person to take over your temple, your contingency plan, or you can design your own funeral. So pick either one of those things, bring it back for part 2 tomorrow. And we will start off by reviewing a few of those. But mostly what I'm interested in is knowing what was it like to engage with the concept of death when people are dropping dead around us pretty fiercely. Y'all feel like y'all can do that?
Lord Phoenix, they would like you to repeat that. The 2 different things for homework.
Okay, yeah, so you can either write your own eulogy or a portion of your will. So an example of that might be who is going to get which of your magical tools, who is going to be the next in line to run your temple if you're a temple head. If you are in charge of an order, who would you name to be the next in the order, and how would you want that delivered, right? So either one of those 2, or design your own funeral. And so by design your own funeral, I mean, who are your pallbearers? What music are they playing? Who is going to recite your eulogy? And you can really have a lot of fun with this. Like if you want to be like, send down a river on a floaty raft and have the arrow, like all of that. Just like use your imagination, really get into this assignment and start to design your own funeral. And so when we come back tomorrow for part 2, what I'm really going to be interested in is how it feels to be doing that amongst a global pandemic. And then tomorrow we will move into the infamous death meditations, which are a series of meditations that were written by Gretchen Schork, who is an elder in my temple, and who's also a presenter this weekend. So if you end up going to her workshop, say, hey, we heard of your death meditations, and she would probably love to know that people know about them.
So, they're asking if they have to share it.
Maybe.
I'll take that as a yes.
I said maybe.
He said maybe. Oh, very interesting. Sir Alan said that they had a Viking funeral in Chicago a few years ago.
Glorious. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end part 1 here. Also, as a note, I am doing $10 readings. Donations go directly to the tradition. There's a link on the Lustration page. So do feel free to take advantage of that. And thank you all for showing up. And hopefully I will see all of you tomorrow for part 2. You guys all have a great night.
Awesome. Thank you, Lord Phoenix. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yay, see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. I gotta work for 4:30.
I work tomorrow
Good
night.
luck, honey. Good luck to both of you.
Thanks.
Better make that money. Hello.
Mama needs a new pair of shoes.